För ty träder Ebbe Skammelson så mången vill stig. Hi and welcome to Annoyed Kitten, where we today will talk about medieval ballads. Scandinavian medieval ballads, actually. And what that is. Before we start, I'm just going to announce that, hey, I have a Facebook page now. So you find the link in the description below as usual and go check it out. And also by liking and commenting on this channel here on YouTube helps the algorithm so that more people might actually find these videos. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual business of this video today. Scandinavian medieval ballads. It's a genre of songs that contains of long narrative text with a shorter frame that is constantly repeated. These ballads, also called traditional ballads, probably started to form during the 14th century, but we do not know exactly how old they are, because the earliest time that they were written down is usually during the 16th century. That's when it started to become popular among the nobility to write down these songs into little songbooks. As with both folklore, folk tales, and other storytelling that has an oral tradition, we have to search for clues that are few and sometimes very hard to find when you try to set an age on these. We can find hints here and there. We find hints both in medieval text and paintings, but mostly we kind of have to make a good grounded guessing. From what the academic world within both literature and music seems to agree on, though, is that some of these do have a medieval origin, probably 14th century at least. But they also agree on that some of this was probably written later, probably during 16th and 17th century, when this type of ballads sort of got an upswing. And we today sadly doesn't know exactly which one is from actual medieval times and which was created later. Again, it's a kind of a little bit of a guessing work. The stories almost take place among the nobility, but that doesn't mean the songs was written for only the nobility. The common people probably also enjoyed these as entertainment, and these ballads seems to have been used as a dancing music, as well as telling the great epic story. The name medieval ballad easily get you fooled that this was only used during the medieval times, but these songs and dances has continued to be used and spread among the whole Scandinavia into modern days. A version of them is still used as traditional dancing ballads at the Faroe Island under the name Kveiðurdansur. And you will also find very similar songs in especially the British Isles, but also in other parts of Europe. And these songs also seems to stem from around the same time as the Scandinavian ballads. Svenskt visarkiv, the Center for Swedish Folk Music and Jazz Research, has documented, published and researched these ballads since 1950s. They have given out their collected ballads into several different books, one for each subgenre, but their webpage is a great treasure for people that are interested in this type of music. Here you will be able to find recordings and find texts and tunes, and you can also read up on the history. And for once, I can actually refer you to a page that has information in English. Yay! So link is down below. Go check it out. It's an amazing site with tons of information about medieval ballads. As I already stated, these songs are long. Sometimes they have up to 60 or 40 verses. The kind of average here is 25. And if you look upon the still used tradition from the Faroe Island, the way you as a group sway, slow dance to the songs, helping the lead singer to join in on the refrain lines, it almost creates a trance-like state where the group will feel very connected to both the story and the group. And then we have the story it tells. So this was good entertainment, even though we today might think that 40 verses with a constantly repeating refrain is a bit much. But my theory here, though, is that, well, people have always been people, and I would bet there were people back then that also thought that this was way too slow and boring and too long. And when the poet took its place among the people that started to dance, there were probably someone's like, oh, need to go hunting or go to check out the wine cellar. So yeah, we people tend to be people regardless if we are living in a 15th century castle or a 21st century apartment. Before we go into the form of the ballad, I thought I would make you more at home with the stories and the different subgenres. There are 6 subgenres and they all kind of resemble each other, but I hope that I can sort out a little bit how they differ. The subgenres are ballads of chivalry, ballads of the supernatural, historical ballads, legendary ballads, heroic ballads, and last, jocular ballads. There are, of course, always some that differs, but as a general rule, ballads about chivalry, the supernatural, and legendary comes from Denmark and Sweden, and heroic ballads comes from Norway. Historic and jocular ballads seems to come from all over the Scandinavian area. The most common of these ballads are the ones about chivalry. The setting is usually somewhere between 12th to 16th century, almost always among the nobility, and if the cemented type of patriarchy and social structure that was present in the past make you nauseated, you better look elsewhere. Here is where you find tragic and epic romance, test of fidelity, betrayal, and conflicts of loyalty. You will find manly men and fair maidens and brothers that are killing each other over the woman they want to marry, and poor women burned at the stake just because they were accused of being unfaithful. These stories almost never ends well. Usually the hero is killing off his whole family, the love of his life, and he has to leave the country as an outlaw. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually do love these songs, even if it might sound like I don't in this video. But you have to look upon them with the eyes of the person that wrote them. And you have to keep in mind what kind of social structure that person lived in. This goes for all subgenres, of course, but it comes out as most prominent in the subgenres of chivalry ballads and historical ballads. If you look at the songs with a pair of modern glasses, these stories are kind of horrible. These type of songs does carry with them a long tradition of a structural society where patriarchy ruled and violence and rape against women was happening without questioning. And to uphold your honor often involved killing your sister, your wife, or your daughter because she has not followed the written or unwritten laws of society. She has by her actions shamed herself and her family, and it was these men that had to take action against her to uphold their honor and erase her shame, and so also erase their shame. This discussion isn't something that is simple. Gender questions and structural violence because of family shame never are. But if you don't want to wait for me to make a special video about this, because I do have a plan to make a special video just on this topic. But if you don't want to wait for that and you happen to read Swedish, I can recommend you to read an article by Ingrid Åkesson. Mord och hor i medeltidsballaderna, en fråga om könsmakt och familjevåld. The article exists online and I will put a link down in the description below. It's a great read. One of the perhaps most famous of these so-called chivalry ballads are the one about Ebbe Skammelson. Here we meet the family Skammelson and the two brothers Ebbe and Peder. Ebbe is courting the fair maiden Lucia, but has to leave to serve his king for a time before any wedding can happen. While he does this, Peder deceives him, convinces Lucia that Ebbe is dead, and offers to marry her instead. He first tried to kind of trash talk him and says that, oh, he's spitting on your name, and she says, oh, no, I know Ebbe. He would never trash talk me. But then he says that Ebbe is dead. She then says she loves Ebbe, but if it's true that he is dead, she will marry Peder. Meanwhile, Ebbe is having worrisome dreams, and it points toward that something has happened behind his back. So he's riding with haste back to his father's house. There he enters during the wedding between his love Lucia and his brother Peder. He drinks and cries for the whole day, and then he goes rampant. He kills Lucia, his dad and his brother, and Peder. He cuts off the hand of his mother, and then he has to leave the country because now he is an outlaw. Ebbe Skammelson is also a good example where the refrain that is present from the start and is constantly repeating through the song also is a predictive of the horrible thing that will happen. För ty träder Ebbe Skammelson som mången vill stig. Translated, that means, for Ebbe Skammelson is walking on a treacherous path. That word, villstig, it can mean a treacherous path, probably pointing back towards that his brother is deceiving him, but also means a path that will make you lost. So we know from the beginning that this is not going to go well. The predictive refrain, as well as the violence towards a family member to uphold honor, is also present in the ballad Sven I Rosengård. The first verse is his mother asking him where he has been for such a long time, and he answers that he has been in the stable, with the following refrain, I vänten mig sent eller aldrig, which roughly translates into you will wait me late or never, which of course implies that, something bad has happened, and he cannot stay in Rosengård, his home, anymore. You quickly get the answer. He has killed his brother. Why he has done that isn't really told in the song, because the song is mostly about his mother asking him when he will return home again. And here is a long line of verses where he says scripted things like, when the swan turns black and when the raven turns white, riddles that are a symbol of the impossible, and that is present in a long line of folk tales and folklore. So the answer is never, and his mother is a bit slow, so it takes about, up to 15 verses or so for her to get this, when he has to spell it out for her in the last refrain, that then changes to I vänten mig aldrig, you will wait me forever. Then we have the song about the poor woman that gets burned at the stake. Yeah, here we're really getting into the hard stuff. Women that get burned at the stake, or in other ways killed or tortured because they are accused of being unfaithful or whoring around. And the really worst is the story about Peder and his sister. We meet Sir Peder that is trying to convince his sister Kerstin to sleep with him. Yes. And when she says no, the bastard of the man goes to their father and says that Kerstin is whoring around, and also she kills her offspring and buries it in the woods. And the song here tells the audience, what father would not believe his son? So instead of asking Kerstin about this, the father gets really mad, and he decides to burn her at the stake. He calls for his men to gather woods from the forest, and then they drag poor Kerstin to the churchyard, where they throw her up on the fire. There are even verses where Peder is mocking her, pretending to give her water, and then knocks it out before it's reached her. And she is saved, well, if you can call it saved, because she actually do die on the stake, but she is saved by two white doves that comes down, turn her into a third dove, and they fly up to heaven with her soul. Peder is instead fetched body and soul by two black ravens and taken down to hell. Yes. So this is apparently entertainment. And we might easily say, well, it was back then, but actually, we still sing these songs. These songs are still sung by folk musicians in the whole of Scandinavia. I will not start raging about the patriarchy again, but yes, the medieval ballads isn't that pretty when you start to scrape a little on the beautiful language. Except for the ballads of chivalry, or perhaps lack thereof, since they seem keen on killing their brothers and burning innocent women at stake. The second most common of the ballads are the ballads about the supernatural. Here is where you meet water spirits, werewolves, witches, and other supernatural beings, usually trying to lure the hero in some kind of way. Examples of these ones are Hermannelig, Sir Mannelig, where a mountain troll is trying to offer gifts to Sir Mannelig, so he would marry her. She offers him horses, mills with gold and stones, and magical swords that will make him invincible. But in the end, he harshly tells her that she is a troll and not out of the Christian faith, so he will not marry her. She is devastated, runs out the door crying, and you learn that if he had married her, she would have lost her pain. Now, this is interesting for people that are doing research about Scandinavian folklore, because there is this idea about supernatural beings that if they manage to marry into the Christian community, they can be saved. And actually, these type of ballads sometimes are our only source about some kind of supernatural beings that is older than 16th or 17th century. We also have Herr Olof och Sjöjungfrun, Herr Olof and the Mermaid, where the mermaid is luring him down to live with him in the sea, offers him a drink that makes him forget, and he forgets completely that he ever had a family or a fiancé. We also here see numerous ballads of the enchanted maiden that is turned into a bird or some other kind of animals, and sometimes a wyvern. A wyvern is a kind of a snake-like creature that is the Scandinavian form of a dragon. Sometimes the big manly hero of a prince or knight managed to save the maiden, and the story actually isn't that tragic. It can actually have a happy ending. One of these with a happy ending is about the knight Sir Peder and the enchanted harp, sometimes called the power of the harp, harpans kraft in Swedish. And yes, you might notice that this is the same kind of name that I am repeating, Peder. And yes, it is the same name because Peder, Kerstin, Olof and Sven are names that constantly come back in these ballads, and we will go into that later. So Sir Peder in this supernatural ballad is actually not that bad of a guy. He is riding to fetch his bride and is constantly asking her, "My heart dearest, what are you grieving for?" And she gives him all kinds of answers why she isn't grieving. And then after a long ride of verses, we get told that beyond the castle there is a bridge over a river, and there she already lost her sisters. There are 7 in the older versions and only 2 in the more modern versions. And maybe this is because in the more modern versions of these ballads, we like to rhyme in the end, which isn't happening as much in the older versions. And in Swedish, to rhyme on the word 7, which is sju in Swedish, that's freaking hard. But två, that's a very easy word to rhyme on. So that's just my theory why this might have changed. Back to the ballad. Okay, so she's crying and she's devastated. Oh God, I'm going to lose my life just as my 2 sisters did. But Sir Peder, no, don't worry, he tells her, I am going to fix this. I'm going to widen the bridge and I'm going to have men riding at your side. Don't worry, my love, I will so make this safe for you. Yeah, right. When they come to the bridge, there is two lovely deers dancing, and the man completely forgets about the poor maiden and go off hunting. There is a verse here that actually said that when she's trying to cross the bridge on her own, the horse is going on 4 golden horseshoes and 15 golden nails. And this is again interested when it comes to folklore, because according to old folklore, iron was a protection against supernatural. So this means that since this dude was so rich that he didn't have normal iron horseshoes that could have protected her, but he had golden shoes on the horse, she's completely out of protection, and right and said she falls down into the river, taken by Näcken. It's a Scandinavian folklore water spirit. Now Sir Peder, of course, realized what had happened, but he has a magic harp and a very magic voice. So he starts playing and singing, and he plays the bark of the hardest tree, he plays the child from the mother's knee, and he also forces Näcken out of the water with his song. Hey, katten. Here comes my own singing partner. Hey. Yeah. Oh. So. Yeah, my faithful companion. So, back to the ballad. Näcken then tells him that if he stops playing, Näcken I will give you your maiden if you just stop playing. And Sir Peder says, yes, thank you, but I also want my 2 sisters. Sorry, her sisters. Yes, but I also want her 2 sisters. And of course he gets this, and the song ends with Sir Peder marrying the fair maiden, and the sisters is happily married off to his brothers. So all is ending happy and well. But don't cheer too much. This group also includes the songs that isn't about the supernatural, but has some kind of magic done to some person in the song. Here you will find the Ballad of the Enchanted Childbearer. The Ballad of the Enchanted Childbearer. It's about a woman, Kerstin, yeah, same name again, that now carry her child for 7 years and 40 weeks because she was hexed by her mother-in-law. She of course dies giving birth to these almost 8-year-old kids, and then the mother-in-law is burned at the stake. In the medieval ballads, the name like Kerstin usually didn't promise a good ending. We see the same ending in the Enchanted Harp, that is also called the 2 sisters. 2 sisters are competing over the same guy, and the ugly kill the fair one, and a musician then finds the corpse and for some unsaid reason gets the great idea to turn her body into a harp. Yeah, sometimes you really have to wonder what these guys that wrote these songs was on. Anyhow, the harp is then carried to the hall where the ugly sister is just about to get married to the dude, and the harp sings about her tragic fate, and the ugly sister is then executed. You guessed it, burned. The legendary ballads usually doesn't come with any more happy ending than the other 2 categories. These ballads feature stories that very often is taken from the Bible and the legends and lore around the Christian faith. And we know that the Christian church is kind of built upon suffering, Jesus and the saints and all. So, yeah, you kind of have it all here too. But there are some exceptions, and the one that is most popular today and is still sung today is the ballad about Sankt Stefan. Sankt Staffan in Swedish. This one is still used during our Sancta Lucia traditions, and it's actually one of the oldest songs we have. And the source for it is English, and it is written down around the 14th century. So this is one of the ones where we can actually point towards a really old and medieval source. Historical ballads could very often be a chivalry ballad, but it's told about what is to be believed to be an actual historical event. Sometimes, though, you have to dig a little to exactly understand what kind of event it's supposed to tell about, because names and details have often changed. Here you have an alarming amount of abductions of women. The most famous is perhaps Vreta klosterrov, in English, the abduction from the cloister of Vreta. This ballad tells the story about how proud Elin, the daughter of King Magnus, is abducted from the cloister of Vreta and then taken to be married to Sune Folkung. She first refuses, but when she hears that her father, King Magnus, is dead, she has no other choice than to agree, because then she has lost all her protection that she should have from her father being a king. This is believed to be the story about Helena Sverkersson and her daughter that was taken from the nunnery where they was living to be married off to the said family called Folkunga. Helena was the daughter of a king called Magnus, and the Sverker family and the Folkunga family that is both mentioned in the song was real people that was battling over the crown of Sweden during the 13th century. When she was renamed from Helena to Elin isn't really known. Perhaps this was done because the music and poetry made it rhyme better, or because, as in most oral traditions, someone just forgot her name and changed it, and then the next one learned that version of the song. We don't know. But in the song, she's called Elin. And Elin is married off to Sune Folkung, and she hates her husband for 15 years. Then she suddenly becomes ill and is taken to her deathbed. Sune, her husband, comes and visits her and tries to ask her for forgiveness for tormenting her all these years. She is telling him that she will not forgive him. Not for having one of her maids as his lover, and not for yelling at her and beating her and drag her in her hair, and certainly not for her 7 daughters, where only 3 actually survived into adult age. She then tells her 3 daughters who to marry for the first 2, and the youngest should become a nun, and that is her wish upon the deathbed for her daughters. They then turn their face from their father, and it is understood that they leave him. He then tries to yet again ask Elin for forgiveness, but she still refuses and says not even if he walks to Jerusalem and back, and then she dies. Sune Folkung is actually giving her an honorable funeral in the last verse, so I guess that counts for something. Yeah, you kind of have guessed by now that Scandinavian medieval ballads are dark and gloomy and tragic. And I don't know if this is because we Swedes and Danes are this gloomy and dark people, because we live in a very gloomy and dark world where we have like 1 day of proper summer. Yeah, I'm a bit bitter over the Swedish weather today. Anyhow, the heroic ballads usually comes with a better ending, and since these songs are most common in Norway, I guess that the Norwegian people isn't exactly as dark as gloomy as we are in Denmark and Sweden. These can sometimes also bordering into different subgenres. The heroic ballads is usually set in a medieval world where the hero faces some kind of supernatural force, an enemy that has supernatural strength, and the hero, he just handles this like a superhero. The one called Ramunder is one of those very typical heroic themes, but at the same time is also so absurdly exaggerated that it borders on a jocular ballad, and it also contains trolls and giants, which should make it into a supernatural ballad. The story is almost like one of those about the Aesir god Thor, where, it's told to mostly show off Thor's godly strength. Ramundr have the same kind of godly strength and is showing it off in different ways during the song. It starts with the queen trying to give him new clothes, and he refuses the first ones because they are too simple. He demands silk and velvet. It takes 15 yards of fabric just for his pants and 15 yards of leather just for his belt. And then he goes into the mountain to slay trolls and giants. And he does this in a rather happy manner. He is then putting all the trolls' silver and gold into his boat and sails off to the emperor. Which emperor isn't really clear, but a emperor. When the emperor sees him standing in the courtyard, he begins to become scared. Ramundr makes the houses shivers just by clapping his hands together, and he makes the earth tremble just by banging with his sword. The emperor tries to make him leave by offering his daughter, because she's probably very happy about that. Anyhow, Ramundr says that, no, that daughter is mine anyway, so he just cuts the head off the emperor. So perhaps not a happy ending for the emperor, nor his daughter. We actually don't know her view of the thing because it's not mentioned. But at least this story is not as tragic as it is for poor Ebbe Skammelsson. And not in the least as chivalrous. A more calmer heroic ballads with less violence and less blood is the one about Sir Sven Svanevit. There, Sir Sven meets a robber on a path, and Sir Sven says that if the robber can answer his questions, he will be given golden rings that Sir Sven has, and Sir Sven will not fight him over them. The bigger part of the song is Sir Sven asking the robber questions, and the robber is answering them. The questions is in the style of what is blacker than coal or whiter than the swan, and the robber answers that sin is blacker than coal and the angels are whiter than the swan. They conclude in the end that the robber did know all the answers to all Sir Sven's questions, and they drink for 3 days, and Sir Sven uphold his promise and give the robber the gold. My last example of the heroic ballads are actually about a female. Here we have a female that for once tries to fight back. It's called the Warlike Maiden, den stridbara jungfrun in Swedish, and the one I managed to find is written down 1690, but it do have an older source than that. The refrain is also saying something along with, for we shall bring our runes with honor. And we stopped writing with runes during like the 12th or 13th century in Sweden, so this could also point towards that this do have an older source. The story is about 2 knights, one old and one young, where the young one is out to get married and they have set their eyes on a particularly fair and beautiful maiden. But it's also stated very early in the verses that if you try to marry this maiden, you will gamble with your life. But they decide to ride out anyway. And while they are riding, they are stumbling on one horrifying bloody scene after another. I think it's the younger one here that constantly gets scared of these bloody scenes, and the older is trying to convince him to ride on, and so they do. When they come to the castle of the fair maiden, they try to bribe the guard to be able to sneak in, but he is hesitant because he fears the wrath of the maiden. They somehow manage to get into the courtyard and calls for the maiden, but she doesn't want to have anything to do with them. She is not in the mood and calls her men to arms to kill them. This song do have a surprisingly happy ending, because they do manage to sweet talk her into putting her arms down, and then they sit and drink for 2 days. We isn't told so much more after that what actually happens. It takes 28 verses for this to happen, and we're kind of left there. But the warlike maiden does say in the 27th verse that she actually fancied the young knight and might consider to have him as a husband, so we can probably conclude that a marriage did happen. Last but not least, we have the jocular ballads. This was not considered to be a type of medieval ballads until rather recently, but they do follow the same form, and also these do stem from at least 16th century. They have a mocking, often crude and burlesque tone, and they have a rather explicit content with a lot of hints towards sex, sometimes not even hints. And the setting is among the common people, and both farmers and animals here appear almost as symbolic characters. And they are very often mocking of the authorities and the priesthood. No, wait, you say, no, they can't be right. People in the old days was prude and orderly, and they would never have dared to mock the nobility and the priesthood. Oh, you sweet summer child. There are tons of poetry as early as the 13th century that have both scandalous and rather explicit content, and it also paints the priest and nobility off as greedy, whoring fools. We have the example of Guillaume Figueira, a troubadour that lived in France during the first half of the 13th century. In his invective against the priesthood, he writes, "The one that dwell in company of whores is the one that carry out the mass next day." No, people has been people for all ages, and the humor back then didn't differ so much from the humor we have today. The power in the jocular ballads often changes, so here we see the farmer's wife beating on the farmer, and the servant girl that demands an absurd large wage to even consider to come working for someone is a very popular theme. It has several different versions with several different refrains and melodies, so yeah, it seems to be a very popular theme. In some versions of this, the servant girl gets offered all kinds of bonus things, like having 12 beds where she can sleep with all the men that works on the farm. But in the end, the guy that's offering her a job, he tells her that the devil may take a servant girl like that. He wants to be in peace on his farm. So, to go back a bit and point towards the patriarchy society that this song stems from, even if the jocular ballads sometimes portray women as independent and ones that dares to ask for things, the laugh is often had on the woman's expense in the end. Now that you are more accustomed to the stories, I thought it might be good time to explain the form and the language of these ballads and how they are. I have mentioned some of the things already, like the repeating of names and the repetitive refrains that sometimes predict the horrible end, and sometimes they seem to be there just to set the time, like allt under den linden så grönan, under the linden tree so green, which means summer. Or it is used as a poetic way of just giving the story some oomph. Yes, it's a word, oomph. There are 3 different ways of building up the verses and the refrain. The one that is considered to be oldest of them is the one with a 2-line verse and a refrain line in the end. You see this in the story about the power of the harp. Och inte sörjer jag sadel eller häst, och inte sörjer jag att du haver mig fäst. Min hjärtans allra käraste, vad sörjer du då? And then we have the other 2-line verse where the refrain is a 2-line part that is separating the lines of the verses. The story about the enchanted childbearer is built this way. Och Siljebrand körde på hönloftets svala, allt under den linden så grönan. Där fick han se sin dotter i lunden fara, i riden så varliga genom lunden med henne. And last we have the 4-line verse with the refrain line at the end. Ebbe Skammelson is a version of this. Ebbe han tjänar I konungens gård både för guld och ära. Hemma går Peder hans broder, bortlockar hans hjärtans kära. För ty träder Ebbe Skammelson så mången vill stig. The melodies are simple, as you can hear, and sometimes even a bit monotone. So, with a very few changes, like skipping some words or putting 2 verses together or separate them, you can more or less sing all stories to most melodies. So, I played around with this, and here I have put the text of The Power of the Harp to the melody of Ebbe Skammelson. Och inte sörjer jag sadel ej häst, ej heller att du har mig fäst. Och inte sörjer jag att jag är ung, guldkrona är inte tung. Men hjärtans allra käraste, vad sörjer ni då? Or, to make it in the opposite way, I here sing Ebbe Skammelson's text to the melody of The Power of the Harp. Ebbe han tjänar konungens gård både för guld och för sin ära. För ty träder Skammelson så mången vill stig. Now for the people that knows this, it sounds completely horrible wrong, but as you noticed, it does kind of work. And to be able to do this, of course, you have to know the form of the language. I have been touching this area already, but let me go back to the names. Kerstin, Peder, Sven and Olof are names that constantly appears in these texts. And it's almost a little bit like with Commedia dell'arte, where each name comes with a special type of character. Kerstin is always referred to as Little Kerstin. She's always a fair and innocent little woman, and there are very, very few songs where she doesn't die in a tragic way. So Peder is usually a bad guy in some form. He is whoring, raping, lying, treating women really bad. And the only version where I have seen him portrayed in any kind of good way is actually in the supernatural ballad, The Power of the Harp. So Sven is portrayed as wise, always with a high sense of honor, and seems to be a more of a good character. Sir Olof is also one of the good characters, but he is usually used in the type of supernatural ballads where he gets fooled by some kind of supernatural being, be it elves or mermaids. So I might not want to put the trust in that one. But it's not just the names. You will find a lot of these same type of phrases. The woman that has done an evil deed is always burned in ashes and ember, aska och glöd. You will find this both in the story about poor Kerstin, the enchanted childbearer, and the story about the 2 sisters. Just as you in other stories will find that the men seems to always be wearing blue capes, but when they are leaving to go traveling, they put on a red cape. Han axlar skarlakan sin. And they are also entering the rooms in the same kind of way. Han gångar sig I frustugan in, hon gångar sig I stugan in. You also find a lot of the same kind of expression from the people in the songs. The answer Lucie gives in Ebbe Skammelson when she hears about Ebbe's death is exactly, more or less word for word, the same that Elin gives when she hears that her father is dead. Är det sant I sägen till mig att Ebbe broder är död, så hjälp mig den evige Gud, jag bliver er fästemö. That was Lucie's answer. Now listen to this. This is answer from Proud Elin. Är det sant I sägen till mig, kung Magnus min fader är död, så är det ingen I världen till som löser mig av min nöd. And what you notice here is that I use the same melody for both of them, because I actually don't know the melody of the story about Elin. But as you see, I could just easily transfer it to Ebbe Skammelson. Now, why are they built this? Well, a singer that has to learn a song by listening and to have to keep several of these stories in his mind. And remember that these stories are long, they have 40 up to 60 verses. Well, a singer like that need a help in remembering the verses. Using this type of poetic language with a setting of standard phrases, names that comes with a certain character, etc., will help you a lot in this task. Even if you don't remember, you can easily just change the song with a couple of other phrases and words, and you will still hold the style, and you will also not have to pause and remember the song. Because remember, this was used as dancing music, so you wanted to continue the music, to continue that trance-like state that you put your audience in. And then we have the numbers 3, 7, and 40 that is constantly appearing. The number 3, 7, and 40 is something that shows up all over the world as magical numbers within both folklore, folk magic, and folk tales. Now, an expert in math could probably explain this as some kind of primal numbers, but I'm really lousy at math, so I'm not going to try to explain this to you, but I will state this fact. These numbers appears in folk tales, folklore, medieval ballads, and is used all over the world for thousands of years like this. So these numbers do have a magic attachment in the folklore, folktale era. So, well, if that can't get some conspiracy theories to go bonkers, I don't know what could. So I will make sure to record some of these songs so you can actually listen to them. And one is already out. It's the one about the enchanted childbearer, and it has English subtitles. And also, as already mentioned, do go and check out the links below, both for my Facebook page, the Center for Swedish Folk Music and Jazz Research. And, well, until next time, bye!